So I was in my senior year in veterinarian school. I was fairly proud of being on top of my class. For the final exam, we had to do surgery on live animals. So each of us received a goat for the operation. And the operation was fairly simple. All we had to do was to open up the goat's stomach as if there was an obstruction. We would put our hands inside to clean the obstruction up. And then we would sew it up without leaving our scalpel or any other tools inside. If the animal survives the operation, we would get an 8+. If it dies due to our failure as a surgeon, we will only get an A-. So I got my goat. I was operating on my goat. I named him Jorge because he had a similar haircut to the guy I used to buy tamales from. Unfortunately, the other goats were in the hands of my classmates. Midway through my operation on Jorge, I couldn't help but notice the other goats were getting swarmed by bugs and flies circling around them like vultures. If the operation is getting smelly and attracting bugs, that's not a good sign. So I quickly wrapped up my surgery on Jorge, and everything went swimmingly. He's still alive today. We keep in touch. I would go to visit him once in a while. His favorite snack is rice crackers. After the exam, I watched my fellow future animal surgeons carry their dead animals one by one out of the big blue biohazard dumpster. I couldn't help but smile humbly with pride and superiority over my peers. Since then, I grew a remarkable sense of distrust over my classmates who have graduated and moved to cities across the country, including Austin. So maybe they'll take care of your animals one day. So when you're looking for a new vet, all I suggest is check the Yelp reviews. So 2 years before my successful operation on Jorge, I was vacationing on a remote island in Southeast Asia. I stayed in a hostel. In the morning, as I was climbing down the rusty bunk bed, there was an explosion of blood from my hand. I started panicking. But the front desk didn't even offer to call me an ambulance. They just pointed me to the small clinic across the street. I screamed as I entered the small clinic. I begged the nurse to take the bed frame out of my hand. It was not a bed frame. It was a tiny little piece of rusty metal from the bed. But I was panicking. The nurse calmly asked me to follow her to the back. I felt so relieved. But she didn't even offer me an Advil before she started digging into my hand with forceps. It was so painful, so I passed out. I came back to consciousness and she poured hydrogen peroxide all over my hand and began bandaging. She told me that she hadn't found any parts of the bed frame in my hand. I was a little suspicious, but I decided to trust her due to her kind face. As I was waiting for her to finish bandaging my hand, I was looking around the small clinic. As a fresh vet student, I began to examine this medical facility. I noticed some peeling, faded wallpapers, an ashtray, and some cigarette butts on the nurse's desk. That worried me. Once I was all bandaged up, the nurse recommended that I should get a tetanus shot. Initially, I was worried that it would cost me a lot of money. When she told me that it would only cost $2, I immediately thought that those might be the black market knockoff drugs. I just saw that on the news. So I was faced with two choices: trust the clinic and get some kind of unknown substance directly injected into my blood, or don't trust them and probably end up with tetanus. The nurse had a kind face, so I decided to let go of my worries and let her inject me. So I rolled up my sleeve, ready for the shot. The nurse giggled and she shook her head. She said, "Oh, well, this doesn't go in your arm. Please bend over." Now I felt like a Tom and Jerry cartoon character, with Jerry, the nurse, holding a giant needle trying to aim its target on my butt. I almost screamed and she hit the target. She just shook her head. Now we're back to vet school 2 years later, after my successful operation on her head. One day, I found myself in pain again from that hostile experience. I knew something had gone wrong that day. The pain from the rusty bed frame had awoken. And the nurse who bandaged my hand 2 years ago, she never pulled the rusty metal out. I had been scammed. But this time, I was not on a remote island, and I didn't have to rely on Nurse Jerry. I was a successful vet student who had just completed a major operation on a goat. And what are goats if not extremely human-like? So I thought if I was good enough for Jorge, I was good enough for myself. As an A+ student, I knew it would be a simple operation. So I decided to operate on myself and lay the bed frame to rest. With the school's supplies and equipment at my disposal, I made my way to the lab. I brought a freshman to assist me because I thought that would be a wonderful learning opportunity for him to watch me conduct my surgery. I took a vial of anesthetic, injected it into my hand. I set a timer so I would know when the anesthesia would be at its full strength. The timer went off. I poked my hand. Didn't seem to be working. It was still painful. So I waited and waited. I kept poking my hand. Still not working. Eventually, my assistant picked up the anesthetic bottle. He looked at it and said, "I think this expired." Now I got expired drug in my body. So that was not good. But I knew it wouldn't kill me. It would just delay the process for the anesthesia to take effect, and possibly with a weaker effect. So I kept waiting. But I grew impatient, and I thought the anesthesia was as good as it was going to get. So I grabbed my scalpel without any fear, trying to think of my hand as belonging to someone else. I started slicing. I was so sure and confident of myself. This operation would be a success. When I saw the blood poured out of my hand, it suddenly became very real. This was no goat. This was my own hand, and I had just cut it wide open. And the sight of my own blood, I started blinking a lot. And then I passed out. When I woke up, I saw my assistant being very helpful by having a look of pure fear on his face and hiding in the corner, away from all the blood. I had no time to delay. There was an operation at hand, and the surgeon had just come back to consciousness. I grabbed my scissors. As I went to grab forceps, I realized that I could only hold one or the other. I really hadn't thought this through. It was then my assistant who assisted me to the hospital. My parents were contacted. They came to the hospital. The situation was explained to the surgeon, and it was decided that the surgeon would take over the operation from where I had left off. just handing the case off to a colleague. As the surgeon started digging into my hand, blood sprayed out of it again. When my mom saw the blood, she fainted. I guess it runs in the family. As I was watching the surgeon operating on my hand, I learned the most important surgical lesson that nobody had ever told me at vet school. You need both hands to conduct a surgical operation.